And we are now live. Hello and welcome to another sit down. This one is a sit down with Thom Robertson. It's another one of our Armada online live broadcasts. I am your host, Xavier. I'm joined by Fish, Zorian, Vaj, and with us as well as a special guest is Thom Robertson himself.
Hello, Xavier.
All right, how are you doing, Thom?
I'm fine.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us on this one. I think we are getting more and more views coming on. I think the highest we've had is 30, so we want to try and hit that peak. I'm getting messages through saying the sound is good, so we're going to get into this. We thought we'd bring you on just to talk about the game. I know we put up a channel earlier in the week, didn't we, with all the place to collect questions together, and I think it was one of the most popular channels with questions. So I managed to forward a few on to you as well, didn't I, Thom?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so I think we'll get straight into it. My first note on this, I must admit that for all the other broadcasts, I've gone through and I've written out a full script for myself with lots of prompts, so it keeps flowing nicely. For this one, um, evidently I forgot to finish it, so I'm kind of winging it. I'm kind of winging it at the minute. So the first point though was going through some background information. Obviously, Thom, do you want to tell us a bit more about your involvement in Artemis in case somebody doesn't know?
Sure. I'm the creator of Artemis. I am an indie game developer and have been for a long time. I think I kind of officially went indie as a game developer in 2003 after my last job in the video game industry, which was working on the PlayStation 2 port of The Sims for a contracted company called Edge of Reality in Austin, Texas. Um, that was the last time I collected a paycheck from anybody else doing video game development work, um, and I don't regret leaving that behind. Though I certainly am very lucky that I'm able to do that, which is to say, leave that behind.
So,
Um,
what was it that kind of prompted you to go into indie development instead of staying on with a company like that? What was the kind of driving force behind it?
I'm an artist. I'm always interested in my own ideas and my own creativity. When you work in the video game industry, you're always working on somebody else's idea. That's the bottom line.
So it kind of give you that freedom to explore your own um, ideas and develop them instead.
Yes.
All right, and through that decision, you managed to get onto Artemis. How did you come onto the idea of Artemis and the whole concept of it?
Well, that's actually a fun idea. I mean, or a fun thing to talk about because while, again, while I kind of officially went indie in 2003, I've been programming since I was 13. And the very moment that I figured out how to program, all I ever wanted to make was games. Making a spreadsheet or building a tool sounded really boring to me. Programming is just about making games as far as I'm concerned. When some of my colleagues would kind of be down on my technical expertise, sometimes I would escape and say, "Well, I'm not really a programmer. I'm a game designer who happens to be able to program." But be that as it may, when I was 18, I believe, I and my buddies all had Commodore 64s, and I had the idea for Artemis, which was I envisioned connecting all of our Commodore 64s with a wire and having a separate bridge station for a starship on each person's computer that would work together.
So
So that idea way back when I guess I was 18, so that was 1984.
so that
Um,
I remember the Commodore 64. I was a very young child when the Commodore 64 was around, and we had one of those. And that was way before even the idea of connecting computers came up. I think was that not around like the birth of the internet or something?
those the internet was cooking as ARPANET. The official start of the internet was 1995, so it would have been about 10 years before.
So
Um,
it was way before the idea of connecting up computers. You were already thinking of a game that could utilize that technology.
yeah, but again, I was surrounded myself with friends who were also nerdy and technical, and some of them were much better programmers, much better technologists than I was, and they were already deep in the weeds of what computers could do, including connecting computers together. So to me, it wasn't, you know, this beautiful idea that no one had ever had before. It was just me following along, as far as I was concerned.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So,
So at any rate,
go on.
uh,
Sorry, carry on.
yeah, so 18, I had the basic idea. I certainly didn't have the look in my head. I had the functionality. And I actually took some steps. I actually uh, hooked up some wires and wrote some protocol and sent some data from Commodore 64 to Commodore 64. But, as is the case with, all of my wild and crazy ideas, they burn hot very quickly and then I drop them and move on to something else. So that idea I never really did anything with at the time. It just sat like a little rock in the back of my head for years and years and years. And it was a case of really of that summer of 2010, suddenly my muse allowing me to put together all the pieces and saying, yeah, yeah, you know what? Yeah, that old idea. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I got the network layer. I got the 3D ships. I got the this. I got the that. Okay, nothing's stopping me. I guess I have to go do it. So it was I wouldn't say a switch was flipped, but that little stone in the back of my head just popped out and said, "Okay, it's time."
Cool. So, how in those initial stages then, back in 2010, how quickly did it develop? Because I think you said that the game's been around 10 years. I know I came into it about 3 years into it, so that it was version 1.7 when I started playing it. How quickly were you able to develop it up to that version that I remember?
Well, I know that I started working on it in the at the middle of summer, and by late September, I had it working with helm and weapons. And then over the next couple months after that, I quickly added the science, comms, and engineering stations in their very first versions.
And that kind of became the standard consoles that we've got
Yeah.
now. Then, yeah.
Yes.
All right, and what about shifting it onto Artemis 2? So we had the Artemis 1 version originally, didn't we? And I do remember the switch over from Artemis 1 into Artemis 2. Was there a lot of technical side to swapping over from Artemis 1 to 2?
Well, Artemis 1 to 2 was a lot of work. So it was enough work in terms of the graphics and the user interface overhaul and the several network layers. And I believe that I either did or right after that, I added the scripting language. There was a lot of work and it was all piled together. And it made me say, this is so much work that I'm just going to call it 2.0. So I didn't throw everything away and start from scratch from 1 to 2. Just that 1 to 2 was uh, a a big leap in terms of the total amount of work I did.
All right, I see. And you saying that's when the scripting language came in?
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah, I think
it's
that.
fuzzy. It's 10 years.
I must admit, I think bringing the scripting language in for us as a group in the TSN RP community has been the most powerful part that you've added, and the additions in there and the changes I think has allowed us to take the game to probably somewhere where you may not have seen it taken. Mike was saying a lot of people that you see playing it are fairly new to the game and getting into it. So a lot of the design decisions that you made were to try and get players to interact with the game in a certain way. Energy levels, for example, that's always a controversial one.
You're talking about the 1,000 points of energy that a ship gets whenever they dock at a space station.
Yeah, I think that one came up the other night in the talk with Mike about what was the decision behind like the energy levels that you've got and just the variables that you've got in there. Were there any particular design decisions? Did you tweak it at all, or did you just put in some arbitrary values to see how it went?
Well, it's quite true that if I don't understand what's going to happen, if I've never seen it before, sure, I'll throw some numbers and some functionality together. But specific parts of Artemis gameplay came from specific lessons that I've learned over my years of making video games, and specifically the way the relationship of fuel between the spaceship and the base stations echoes several games that were formative to me, including an ancient game made way before I ever got into computers, called Super Star Trek on teletypes. Um, but even more recent than that, I have a basically a long lost indie game that I made. I would say it was made in 2000, um, which was kind of like a 2D um, 2D single player Artemis. It was top down, and you drove your little ship around, and you beat off the waves of enemies as they came for your stations, and then you docked at your stations to replenish your supplies. So it had that same uh, basic functionality. Um, but initially, I was, thinking the same thing that I thought for Artemis, that these are capital ships, but the few vocal players that who enjoyed that particular game were very adamant that what they wanted more than anything else was performance. They wanted the spaceship they controlled to be faster and turn tighter and be more maneuverable than I thought. So I listened to them, and so what came out of it was much more of an arcadey, uh, zipping game where there was a lot of intensity in the moment. However, that game kind of cemented for me the idea that um, protecting your stations in order to protect your future supply of power and weapons was a good game mechanic. So it seemed like a no-brainer to put it into Armada, to put it into Artemis that way.
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting to hear how the way that you've developed is by putting the product out there and getting feedback from the vocal people who are playing it and what they want and tweaking it, and then putting your own understanding of games development and games design in there. Obviously, we're up to Artemis 2.75 now, aren't we? Is that right?
Yes.
If just try to remember off the top of my head, I should have really made a note. What are your future plans going forward? Are you going to keep going with any of the 2.7 development branch, or is it all kind of hands-on with the next version, which people have been constantly asking about, Artemis version 3?
Uh, Both. I mean, yes, absolutely. Artemis 3. That is my vision. That is the future. Um, I intend to make Artemis 3, and um, and it's a big project, and I've been giving it a lot of thought and a significant amount of attention. But 2.7.5, as it stands right now, I don't think it's going to be the very last version of the two series of Artemis. Because again, there's still such a huge fan base, and you guys always point out problems, always suggest solutions, and I can see how the work is never really done. So we're in that weird space where I really want to keep supporting the two version, because so many people love it and it's so important to so many people. And I don't have 3.0 out yet, but at the same time, I've got a lot of work to do to put 3 out there, and I fully intend to do so.
Yeah. Well, I think from our point of view, when you released 2.75 and we started playing it, it was Fish. Would you agree with me? One of the most stable versions of Artemis that we've been able to play.
Oh yes, it's been much more stable than the prior versions. It's actually been quite a pleasure some evenings when nothing's gone wrong at all.
Yeah, because I mean, when we're actually playing Artemis, we meet on a Saturday. We meet all from what is it, from 8 p.m. till midnight, and we've been able to keep things running all the way through. We do have kind of checks in to be able to, right, we'll stop the server and we'll restart it just to refresh it. But yeah, it's been a really stable version, and seeing a little bit more on 2.7 or on the 2 branch would be really cool. Obviously, don't go on, Fish.
Just before we move on, I've got a question from the chat here. Before we move on to other stuff, Tally says, "Which science fiction show inspired you the most, Thom?"
Well, you know, I'm an old nerd all over the place. I love them all. Obviously, Star Trek TOS is what I grew up with, and Star Trek TOS was the inspiration for Artemis. Um, I've read enough to know that TOS itself was really just inspired by, the way naval ships operate, the bridge and how it functions, and how the the participants in the bridge function together.
Mhm.
And I actually, my first kind of official job in the video game industry was a programmer on a game called Harpoon, and then the sequel Harpoon 2, which was a detailed naval combat simulator um, back in 92, 93, 94. Um, and um, so at that point, I was, the project was filled with people who loved naval history and loved naval warships and had a great deal of knowledge and opinion about all of that. So I got a great deal of you know of education about, well, how does the bridge of a battleship work from those guys. So those are all the direct kind of inspirations for Artemis. But in general, I'm like any nerd. I love all the sci-fi.
Good man.
Good to hear.
Taking no sides there. All right, let's have a look. So we did have quite a number of questions from the community. So a lot of them were based on the game. The first one here from Fernando, he asked about Artemis working with Linux or Mac OS. Whether we could look forward to that in maybe the 3.0 branch, or if it would be possible to get it working in the 2 branch.
The short answer is 2 no, 3 yes. Artemis 3, for what it is right now, is going to be built on my new PAX engine. That's called PAX, mostly because it's very easy and simple to type. And the PAX engine is specifically designed to be platform independent and platform agile. Having said that, the PAX engine has never been implemented in anything except DirectX 11. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of problems, especially relative. A lot of the questions having to do with other platforms regarding Artemis 2 um, are simply answered by saying that Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 are leaning on really decrepit old technology now. It was old when I first cooked up Artemis in 2010, and now it's ancient. Um, and it's a crappy old engine running on DirectX 9, and DirectX 9 doesn't even run very well on modern computers. So it's definitely absolutely time for a change. And on top of that, the 2 engine, which was technically called the Panda engine, again for no reason, um, uh, was not in any way designed to be platform agile. PAX is very much designed to be platform agile. So I fully intend to find solutions for ports once Artemis 3 is functional and usable.
All right.
Awesome.
So it's
Now
definitely.
the PAX engine,
Sorry, go on, Vash.
you actually have 1 or 2 games that use the PAX engine already. Is that right?
That's correct.
The Galactic Relocation game, I believe that was one of them.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The Galactic Relocation game, was that one of them?
Yes. So just as an aside, the Galactic Relocation game, which was a game that a group of my former students and I built in summer of 2019. Was it 2019? Oh no, it was 2018. Was a it was basically a 1-month project to have fun, to see if we could do it, and to see if we could work together, and also to try and put a game on the resume of these young men. And we chased it, and we worked really hard for that month, and we achieved the goal of cranking out a game that they could be proud of. And it happened to also use my PAX engine, yes.
I've put a link to the Steam page in the chat, so feel free to take a look at that. I've played it myself. It's not a bad game, a bit reminiscent of like Civilization and some of those other RTS.
No, nice.
Cool. I definitely want to take a look at, and it'll be a. I guess that's a good test when you develop a new engine like that, to have a few games that run off it to test the engine to work out any bugs. Is that the kind of process that you go to when you're developing those kind of things?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up that way because that is kind of my vision. Um, I started making packs, the engine, right after the last successful Armada, which was April 2018.
2 years.
Yeah. And of course, the initial work I did really fast to try to get an engine up and running and basically functional within a month. But then, I mean, there's iteration. There's always things to add and things to change and things to make better. And I've continued to do so while I've continued to work on various projects. But it was probably more of a year to 18 months ago that it really gelled on me that I'm going to need to make 3.0 and I'm going to need to write from scratch because I had been upgrading Artemis 2 and fighting with at a point when when your code is really really old, you spend more time fighting the code to do what you need to do than actually figuring out how to do what you need to do, if that makes any sense. Um, so at the time that I made the real personal decision, okay, Artemis 3 needs to be pursued. Um, I had a vision that I would pursue it rather roundaboutly. In other words, instead of taking 6 months of my life and just dropping everything and working nonstop on Artemis to build all the pieces, I would continue to build different projects, but I would ensure that for every project, I also inserted a bit of code that would then be reused in Artemis 3. In other words, I was building Artemis out of pieces while really building other projects. And in that 18-month period, I'm actually pretty pleased with how successful I've been. I've got a lot of pieces of code that directly are ready to drop into an Artemis 3 framework. And the new 3D view and the new rendering with the new skybox, the new network layer. There's one of the one of the most obvious calls that all players of Artemis want. They want to break out of the box. They want to go to an infinite universe. They want to go past the edge of the rather restrictive map. And to do that, I have to contain the object data in a fundamentally different way, um, or it just bogs down. As it is, in the high level Artemis games, there's a lot of bogging. It's really challenging to the microprocessor because I'm not segregating objects and sending messages about objects and doing uh, proximity testing on objects in an efficient way. So the solution that I read up and figured on is called dynamic bounding volumes. Uh, and I implemented that about 9 months ago. So I feel pretty good that I've got a lot of pieces of Artemis 3 lying around. And those pieces are weights that keep tipping me over into full scale production.
So it sounds like as you're coding, you like you're saying, assembling a jigsaw almost. You get all these pieces, now you can start putting them together, and you're creeping closer and closer.
I think a jigsaw is a pretty good analogy.
So a couple of the questions that came in, I don't know whether they were aimed at Artemis 2 or Artemis 3, but one of them from E4 Mafia, in fact a couple from E4 Mafia. One was, can we look forward to any significant changes, for example the science and the comms? A lot of players see those as roles that have a little bit less involvement. I know in the casual games people see that as being less involved. We in our games try and get them involved a little bit more through some clever mission scripting and things like that, and clever missions. But are there going to be any more significance to those science and comms role, trying to get them involved or stay more active?
The short answer is yes, sure. I certainly feel like science, comms, and engineering can all be revisited in terms of their functionality and how they work. Um, it was a very long time ago, but um, uh, engineering was completely revamped because of uh, detailed analysis and suggestions by players on the forums. We used to have a simple energy slider bar system, and um, we switched over to the overpowering plus heat management system, simply because somebody on the forums made diagrams and suggested it, and everybody said, "Yeah, that looks good. That looks how like it would be better than what we have now." So I went ahead and implemented it. Um, I um, I still think there's room for improvement in those stations because honestly, I feel like those stations, um, I mean, for most of the time that I was developing those stations, I was directly listening to user feedback. And whichever of those stations people were agreeing was the lamest was the one I would try hard to fix or upgrade or add to.
Yeah, I know over the years some of the changes that engineering. You speak to some of the engineers that play with it in the TSN RP, and after a game, sometimes they are exhausted. So I think you definitely achieved it with engineering, and there's loads of engineers out there who really enjoy that role. And with comms, I think some of the extra functions that you put in with being able to send comms messages backwards and forwards, and then the biggest development of the Game Master console. I think the Game Master console really changed everything when that went in.
Well, and I don't want to break what works. Yeah, but neither do I feel like those stations are set in stone.
Yeah, definitely. So on that same vein, E4 Matthew was asking about communications, and where is that? I've lost the question now. It was asking about communications and cargo management. That was it. Sorry, this is Matsian asking about whether you'd expand on the role of cargo management or the surrendered vessels and things like that.
So I have a well, I guess personal, professional. I have a list of all the things that I need to do to Artemis. The list has existed for almost 10 years. It has undergone a lot of change, and it has been added to a lot faster than I can actually work through it. And of course, at the bottom of it, if I go way down to the bottom of that file, there's stuff that isn't even relevant anymore because things have changed wholesale. It's not a list that I share because, again, it's so very rough and very filled with crazy ideas, feedback from users,
Yeah.
bug fixes, everything. It's just a mess. But I, you know, I, when I get a lot of new feedback, when I've been to a convention and seen that a lot of things that need to be fixed, whatever, I go home, I add my notes to the top of that list, and I sort and adjust that list as needed. Um, Cargo has been at like place 2 or place 3 several times, but has never made it to the top to be implemented. It's a big idea. It requires a lot of new functionality, including a lot of new user interface. Um, and it's a big idea from a gameplay point of view because it breaks everything wide open. Now you can build your own torpedoes. Now you can customize your own ship. Now you can you know, do radical things. You could theoretically collect enough pieces and build a whole other ship and then go drive off in it. There's the sky's the limit when you open the door to having an inventory system. And similarly, of course, the sky's the limit in terms of the user interface because do you want one cargo master in the corner giggling and fiddling with his little inventory all day and nobody sees what he's doing and nobody understands what his plans are and whatever? Artemis is about communication. So how does that work? Do multiple people get access to the cargo manifest? If so, how does that work? Does somebody sell an item out from under somebody else? There's a lot of issues. It's a big deal, and it came close to being implemented several times. Um,
I suspect that there will be a lot of comments on the forums in the next couple of weeks talking about this kind of topic.
Well, and I appreciate the
Yeah.
feedback, as I always have. Um, and I, and again, I'm very cognizant of the fact that Artemis 3 represents a big new start for all of us. So, um, you know, I don't think at this point we're ever going to see an inventory system with cargo in the 2X game. In 3, um, I can't see it being an A number one feature, but maybe a B plus feature, something that we get in sooner than later because everybody wants it and everybody can see some real value in it.
So I think there you go, Matt. Maybe coming up in 3 later on in its development, by the sounds of it. I suppose when you're putting in these new features, you're always considering what the player experience is going to be, and then all the technical side of it. The only kind of coding experience I've got is writing using the mission editor and writing a mission script. And I know writing a mission script, you have to sit there and you have to think, right, what happens if they move this way instead of that way, and what happens if they destroy that instead of this. So I can only imagine those are like magnified 10 times when you're considering a new feature to go into the overall game.
Well, yes, but I mean, don't sell yourself short. These basic questions of having to think ahead and understand what the edge cases are, as programmers call them, is just something programmers do. And so, welcome to the club.
Thank you. So there was a question about porting Artemis to Unity. I don't think that's a particularly relevant question anymore because you've already talked about your own PAX engine that Artemis 3 is going to be built on.
Yeah, but I'll spend 60 seconds talking about that decision.
Yeah, go for it.
Unity and Unreal 4 are the two big engines. And frankly, for most game developers, they're no-brainers. They should be used. You should be using one or the other because they're so incredibly powerful and they're so freaking cheap. In my entire existence as an indie game developer, I've never seen the cost and trouble of making a video game go up. Year after year, it goes down and down and down. It's cheaper, easier, and simpler to make more powerful, more cool games than ever before. And these two engines are a lot of the reason. But if they didn't exist, two others would take their place. These engines are great for what they are. They're not great for who I am. And you know, I specifically at the down low level, the object oriented message passing system that they're built on is rather fundamentally philosophically different from how I want to program. And that's probably the main reason why I don't use them.
Certainly fair. Gotta be comfortable with what you're doing.
Yeah. Just a quick question from the chat here from Kilted Klingon. What are your intentions for max playerships in Artemis 3, if you've got any idea this time?
Well, we can get another question out of the way as the thing. So, one of the huge technical mistakes in Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 was using TCP. The engine or the tool set, the API that I currently have implemented for network code in PAX is an API called ENET, E-N-E-T. And that's essentially a UDP layer. Everyone for the last 10 years has said, of course you're using UDP. That's the only smart thing to do, right? And I was like, no. So I figure that with PAX 3's network layer, I will hopefully be erasing a lot of technical sins. And one of them will be that, you know, in a very object-oriented client-server system like Artemis 3 would be, like Artemis 2 is, not only is UDP the appropriate choice, but UDP really technically breaks it wide open. And at least theoretically, the technology should support hundreds of ships. Now, there are lots of other things that could bog that down. But I'm saying that, as far as I can tell, the network layer won't. So it behooves me to think very carefully about when we go from 8 ships to 80 ships or 800 ships. Obviously, we need a completely different user interface. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be hammering on.
So that I was just going to ask that. Are you planning on making it available to have like more than 8-player ships? And it sounds like that is.
Well, 8 is a very arbitrary number. It's not not really supported by the underlying technology. It's supported by the user interface and the fact that right now you add more ships, you add a whole bunch more network congestion.
Yeah, I see.
So on that same vein, sorry, I was just typing in our notes there. On that same vein, somebody was asking about the TCP payload of the server and the client communications, and if you'd share that. I think that's so that we can. There's a couple of people that develop little bits in between. Is it linked to that? This is where my networking knowledge is kind of found wanting, I'm afraid. But they're asking, can you share the TCP payload of the server and the client communications? For me, who doesn't really know what that means, what is that used for? How does that work with the game? What key part is that kind of allowing us to do with the game?
Okay. Well, it's a tough question that, and it's a challenge to answer it. But I mean, as far as you're concerned of what is it, the network layer of a multiplayer video game is just about sending packets of information from computer to computer. Writing inside those packets is a lot of information about what is the packet, why is it being sent to me, what does it mean to me, what should I do because of the information, is there information I should packetize and send back because of that. It's a whole process. It's a complex layer that, of course, complexifies making multiplayer, multi-computer games. And what he's essentially asking is that he would like to build a man-in-the-middle program that listens as the packets go back and forth. Essentially, grabs a copy of the packets and makes a copy, and then sends them on their way. And then deconstructs the packet and says, well, I know what's in this little packet. I know the information, and I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to drive my own lighting rig. I'm going to do my own extra things based on this message passing that was never really meant for me to begin with. An interception, if you will.
Yeah.
Because, especially because of my long experience with Artemis and how probably during the first 5 years of Artemis, I was literally changing the contents of those packets every month. I am loath to do the considerably extra amount of work to carefully document that and share it so that people can build essentially vampire applications. And this is especially problematic because when they're capturing my data, I don't have any idea of who they are, what purpose the app is for, anything like that. And whether I like it or not, I'm sending chat data, which is your personal information between you and your friends playing. The bottom line is that if somebody really wants to build that kind of add-on app for me or my application, I really feel it's important to find an alternative solution. And I know I didn't really offer that alternative solution in my old technology. I'm not sure at all what the alternative solution could be for my new technology, but the bottom line is that message passing, I'm not sure you want me to spend time on that effort just for a few people who essentially want to, read messages that weren't meant for them from a technical point of view.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So instead of spending the time documenting it all, updating it all, maintaining that, telling people what's changed in this bit, instead you're going to focus your efforts on the actual development of the game itself and making it more fun for players, and also considering, like, if people are building third-party apps that go in the middle, there's, I suppose, from a point of view as a player, there is kind of a security risk there, because I'm sending information out and they're sending information across, and who am I transmitting it to, and where's that information going? I suppose that man in the middle kind of thing can impact that as well.
I guess I don't want to oversell the security issue. I don't think that anybody who was really trying to intercept Artemis packets had any malicious inclination whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely no.
But it's quite true. I would rather be spending my time programming a piece of user interface code that's going to affect all players and make their lives better than to focus on, documenting some minor signals for a few people to build their third-party apps with.
Yeah, and I know
If I had,
like, there's a couple of people that we know in our group who build those third-party apps, and they've come up with some really good stuff. But I know from what I understand, they've kind of reversed engineered or listened into the packets and tried to decode them. And from what I've seen, just from not having to divert your attention from developing the game, they've actually managed to come up with a lot of really interesting stuff. There's a guy called Starry in our group who came up with a thing called Hermes that allowed a few extra functions. I think, Vaj, you had something piggyback on the back of that to extend the GM function. So as a hobby project in the community, I think we could do that instead of having you spend the time and the effort to do that for us, I suppose.
well, yes, and I just I have very complex feelings about it. Um, I absolutely don't want to step on anybody who cares about my game and wants to support it in any way. But it's a challenge um, to open it up in that particular way. And fortunately, that leads us to another thing that I wanted to discuss, and that's on the list about
Excellent.
Artemis 3,
Yep,
which is the new scripting language.
Oh yes, and I can tell you now that is one that I would like to know a lot about.
So, just really quickly, when we first started with the scripting language, I knew it would be a giant ball of headache for everybody, no matter what it was, because that's how it is in video games. Scripting languages are a whole lot of work. They just are. And at that time, I had a real decision to make about whether to roll my own or to go with some pre-existing system. At that time, I believe I did a simple implementation of Lua, but for some reason, I weighed the pros and cons, and at the end, went ahead with the scripting system that exists in Artemis 2 right now. I regret that decision, and I think I could have tipped it the other way, and now with Artemis 3, I am eager to tip it the other way. More specifically, I told you that I was building out pieces of Artemis 3 in my other games. And one of the things I did almost a year ago was I made an implementation in my PAX engine of the Python scripting language. Python is a huge scripting language. It's a big deal. It's a very popular and very well documented scripting language.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I think I've come across that. Do you know the Arduino things that you can get? I've had a go with it on that, and I think some apps that I've come across are built on top of Python and use that scripting language. So I have heard of Python, yeah.
Also, the Raspberry Pis have a lot of Python systems.
Yeah.
Python was the first language I learned.
Mm-hmm.
So Vaj is going to be our new mission scripter.
Well, and as has been the case for a lot of scripting languages that work out well, they don't stay doing one job. They wind up doing a lot of jobs within any particular software solution. For instance, of course, Lua famously runs the entire front end of the World of Warcraft game, which led to an explosion of programmers for the user interface of World of Warcraft. And similarly, I expect while I can go ahead and implement Python scripting as a solution for mission building in Artemis 3, I wouldn't be surprised if we expand that to many things, including doing the job that the aforementioned third-party intercepting apps were designed to do.
Now, I think this links in with something Mike mentioned the other day when we were talking to him about. Is this linking in with being able to customize your consoles and have like extra UI on top of your consoles? Is that kind of linked with that scripting decision?
That's in the long term. My current vision for how I want to implement Artemis 3 consoles has everything to do with the fact that I think Artemis 3 consoles are not nearly as modular and customizable as they could be. When I first started out, my vision was for people to get together on different computers in the same place, playing a Starship Bridge together. And so the idea that somebody has their user interface and also your user interface, for instance, somebody has a helm and a comms on the same screen, seemed like a direction I did not want to go in. I think that enough time has passed that people get where I wanted to go. And also I can, as a game designer, relinquish a little bit of control and let people do what the hell they want to do. So the idea of a more modular user interface that lets you, for instance, play helms and comms on the same screen simply by dragging and dropping UE components seems like a good idea for me for Artemis 3. I've not implemented it in any significant way. Still a lot of work to be done. But doing that kind of does open the door to building user interface elements that are entirely Python scripted behind the screen in such a way that, eventually all the user interfaces are much more customizable and reconfigurable than the Artemis 2 user interface would have been.
That sounds a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we've come up against that challenge, I think, playing online. One person can have windowed screens open and they could have every windowed screen open and play solo. But I know in the way that we play, we always encourage you must have at least 4 people on your ship to play. And you must have one person who's helm, one person is weapon, and one person is then like the captain of the ship, the overall captain, and isn't doing any of those roles. So it's interesting how we're going to be able to customize it a little bit more and maybe tailor it a little bit more, but still have those elements of, no, you're the helms officer, you need to be focusing on that role, please, so that a weapons officer can be doing theirs.
Yeah. On a slightly related note, I've got a question from Angel of Rust. Is native DMX support planned in Artemis 3 or hoped for in Artemis 3 by yourself?
Well, native DMX support is in Artemis 2, isn't it?
I believe so, but the question's there.
No, yeah, if I think DMX support was a really cool feature that I added that I think really turned on a lot of people, especially
For
bridge
sure.
builders.
Hmm.
And I've said before, I don't want to break anything, so I'll definitely be bringing that DMX connectivity over with the rest of whatever it is I could salvage from 2.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be excited about that. I've seen some of the bridge builds on the forums. I don't know if you've checked those out with lighting panels and there's an engineering panel and things like that that people have created from those DMX queues.
believe me, I'm looking at all those pictures.
Yeah.
I can't. It doesn't. I couldn't be more pleased. It always blows me away. Other people's creativity and hard work, and ingenuity. It boggles me and cheers me no end.
Just to piggyback on to the back of that question, E4 Mafia asked something about DMX and what vision do you have of expanding them in Artemis 3?
I don't have a solid vision for that right now. Again, my vision has been tied up with what I consider more fundamental components like the network layer and the rendering layer and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I
Having
suppose we've got
said,
to have a game first to build that onto.
well, I mean, something you said for making sure that you've got that in mind from the very beginning, just from a structural point of view. Um, and that's what I've got is I will be keeping it in mind. I understand that no matter how many uh, variables and events in the game that I try to expose using my DMX user interface, people always want one more, if not 10 more. So I will be trying to find a way to expand and cut and be able to let people be able to customize their DMX experience any way I can.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I suppose Adam Parrott asked in the conversations earlier as well. Did you have any videos of Artemis 3.0? Or do you have anything that you are going to start showing off to crowds or to the community, or is it still in that very much basic stage of putting all the pieces together?
Well, I have Artemis ships being rendered in the new engine with new beam effects and new cool shield effects and new torpedo effects. They're not in Artemis. They're in another kind of turn-based strategy game that I was slapping together. And again, it was kind of a clever ruse I was pulling on myself as usual to make a game that wasn't Artemis and yet sneakily build Artemis code. And I'm so very sad that we missed Armada 2020 in Cleveland because I was ready to show off that work in progress. If everybody wants me to, I will make videos of it and put it up on the forums. I'm not afraid of that. And it's, again, part and parcel of why I say that I feel pretty good about my work making pieces of Artemis over the last 18 months, because I've got something that's graphically quite pretty, that is going to be the basis of what goes into Artemis in terms of spaceships blasting each other with beams. So yeah, I will put that up soon.
I think we just
Awesome.
lost every single one of our viewers because they've gone to the Artemis forums and are constantly refreshing the page, waiting for that to appear. I think you'll end up with the busiest forums at that point. It might crash your website. I know I'm going to be watching the forums very, very closely now.
Well, I'll put the videos up on YouTube. Let's stress out YouTube. It can take the handle.
That'd be really cool. We are coming towards the end of our time that we were broadcasting. There was a couple more questions, so I wonder if we could squeeze these in. Kilter Klingon had asked earlier in the week, are you thinking of any kind of orbital mechanics to go into Artemis?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is he was also asking about planets and moons and things, and I've always agreed that those were cool. They were just kind of out of scale for the rest of the game. Let's plan to put them in at some point, but obviously there'll be a lot of work to do before somebody says, I can't play this anymore without a moon.
The TSN sandbox actually does have planets and moons.
If you
Just throw it there.
yeah, it's amazing what actually you can do with the scripting, the XML scripting. At the moment, as limited as some people say that it is, and I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not. When it comes to coding in languages like that, I can get my head around the logic of the way code works, but I wouldn't know like the limitations of the code compared to one or the other, compared to somebody who really does a lot more with coding than I do.
Well, I can tell you that, it's just long experience in the video game industry. Certainly not just my experience, but the industry's collective expertise is that when you give people a scripting language, a tool to customize, any tool to customize your existing game, people will do with it astounding things that you never thought were possible. And people will never stop asking for new or modified features. So, it's something I shrugged my shoulders about. It was something I knew about and understood when I got into it. So I'm not going to complain. It's just the facts of life.
Right, cool. Well,
Yo, killed the Klingon.
I think that is our hour. So I'm going to wrap it up. Unless Vaj, Fish, Zorian, any other questions you want to pose to Thom before we finish?
There's one more from Matsian, but it is a very hefty question, so I think we're gonna have to let that one slide.
Yeah, sadly we didn't get through all the questions. Thom, anything else you want to go over, talk about before we finish up?
I think I just want to say thank you. I want to thank you guys specifically for holding this virtual event. And I want to thank everybody who loves Artemis and participates because, again, as I said at the top of this hour, you're the reason I keep working on Artemis. You're the only reason I keep working on Artemis. It is said that 9/10 of artists, and by that I mean artists with a capital A, any creative person, lives for external validation. And I am definitely in that 90%. So I really appreciate everything you say and do. And I want to continue to build Artemis for you in the future.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate that.
Very much. I mean, I think the TSN RP community started 7 years ago, and we've been meeting every weekend since playing Artemis because of how much we love the game.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really been brilliant, and my experience of putting together a group to play this game and get together, and the way that it works is just such a unique experience. I've tried playing other games online in groups, and I don't think you get a community like you've got around Artemis with other games. They're just huge, vast communities, but ours is a really nice, close-knit community, and everybody loves the game and looks forward to playing it and adding bits to it and tweaking it. And
makes me happy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna end the live stream there. We got quite a few views. We're 25, 26 views still on at the moment. Thank you very much for joining us for the sit down with broadcast. This is our final sit down with broadcast, so we don't have any more guests lined up, but we saved this one till very last. So we had a little bit more experience when we got to it. Thank you so much, Thom, for giving up your time and joining us, and for answering all those questions. Some tricky questions thrown in there, some very long questions, very technical questions as well. Thank you for the community for posting up loads of questions that we had. Sorry that we didn't get to them all, but I'm sure if you throw up a few posts on the forums, other people might be able to chime in. And I know, Thom, you say you float around the forums and have a look all the time, don't you? You don't necessarily
Yes, I do.
respond, but you keep a close eye on it. So we're going to wrap up there. Coming up next, we've got another live broadcast. It's about the mission scripting competition that we had. There's TSN RP members who went off and tested the mission scripts that were submitted there, and we're going to share our thoughts as well as who we picked as the winning mission scripter. And then we'll be able to send them out so everybody can have a go at them. Join us for that. It'll be coming up probably in about 10 minutes so that I've got time for a breather. So thank you very much, and goodbye, guys.
Goodbye.